It happened last year when I was 22. I had been working nonstop and was feeling completely burnout. Life felt like it was moving on without me, and I had reached a point where I just needed to disconnect to escape for a while. I had a complicated past, and by that stage, I was doing everything I could to distance myself from certain chapters of my life. What I needed more than anything was to disappear for a few days. We've all been there, right? I must have vented out loud one day, because during work, a coworker mentioned this tiny, remote island off the coast of Maine. From what he described, it sounded like the most boring place on earth. There was no nightlife, hardly any tourists after dark, and most people would take the ferry in the morning and leave by sunset. He said if you stayed overnight, it was like having an entire island to yourself. And that's exactly what I needed. I found a vacation rental listing for a small, standalone cottage by the shoreline. The price seemed suspiciously cheap, and it was available last minute. Looking back, I should have thought twice about that, but I was desperate to get away. I booked it without hesitation. The cottage was tiny, just a single room with a bed, a small kitchenette, and a bathroom no bigger than a closet. It was nestled away from the water, surrounded by thick brush on three sides. With the front facing the ocean, there was one window, but it was covered by a flimsy, semi-translucent curtain that didn't do much to block the view. The walls were paper-thin, so I could hear the wind rustling through the brush like it was right next to me. The door had both a deadbolt and a chain lock, which seemed odd for such an isolated location. But I didn't give it much thought. I boarded the late afternoon ferry and arrived on the island. As the sun started to set, I walked around, taking in the solitude. It felt surreal to watch the crowds of tourists slowly disappear as they caught the ferry back to the mainland. By the time the sun went down, I was completely alone. No streetlights, no sounds, just the ocean. It was peaceful, and I was finally able to breathe. I grabbed dinner at a small pub near the ferry landing. The bartender was friendly, but when I mentioned where I was staying, her expression changed. It was a fleeting moment, but it made me uneasy. On my way back, I passed a small dock tucked into a cave, just 100 yards from the cottage. There was a blue motorboat moored there, which stood out because all the other boats I had seen were much larger lobster vessels. It struck me as strange, but I shrugged it off. By 10:30, I was back at the cottage. I locked the deadbolt and chain and got settled in for the night. At that point, everything had been going smoothly, and I was enjoying the solitude. But, of course, things didn't stay that way. I quickly realized my phone charger wasn't working. I tried every outlet in the cottage, but no luck. My phone was low on battery, and I knew it would be dead in less than an hour. I didn't really need it to get back to the ferry, as I had a physical ticket, but I still hated the idea of being without it. So I decided to turn in early and just get some sleep. I fell asleep almost immediately, the exhaustion from the past few days catching up with me. But in the middle of the night, I woke up to something strange. I couldn't tell what had woken me, but once I was awake, I heard it. Footsteps. They were right outside the cottage, on the gravel path leading to the door. The steps were slow and deliberate, like someone taking their time. It wasn't an animal. I held still, hoping it was nothing, but as soon as I shifted in bed, the footsteps stopped. There was an eerie silence that followed. It was so quiet that I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. But then, the footsteps started again. This time, they were coming closer. They weren't passing by. They were coming right up to the door. My heart raced. I felt like they could hear it. I was terrified, but remained as still as possible. I waited, hoping whoever was would just leave. But then, the footsteps reached the door and stopped. My fear intensified when I heard a flashlight click on. The light flashed through the thin curtain of the window. I could see the beam flickering around the door frame, and then I heard the door handle jingle. I froze, praying the deadbolt and chain would hold. The person outside didn't give up. They tried again, this time putting more weight into the handle. And then several hard bangs came, one after another. Each thud was so loud in that small cottage that I couldn't help but flinch with each strike. But instead of freezing up, my mind snapped into action. I couldn't just stay there. I jumped out of bed and crouched down behind the door, bracing for what was coming next. But then, everything went quiet. The silence stretched on for what felt like ages. Then, a voice spoke, low and menacing. "I know you're in there, Leo." I almost screamed, but I caught myself. The voice was unfamiliar, but somehow it knew my name. That was the moment I realized something was very wrong. I stayed crouched, my body shaking, as the footsteps began to move away from the door. They circled the cottage. I could hear them moving along the side of the building, taunting me, knowing I was still inside. I didn't dare move. I stayed hidden, praying for daylight. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps stopped from the direction of the dock. I heard the unmistakable sound of a motorboat engine starting up. It was the same outboard motor I had noticed earlier. The boat pulled away, and the sound faded into distance. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, as soon as there was enough light to see, I ran outside. The gravel around the cottage told the whole story. There were boot prints circling the entire building, leading straight to the water's edge. Whoever had been out there had come by boat, specifically to that cottage, and on that night, they knew my name and they knew where I was. I confronted my coworker, the one who had told me about the island, but he swore he hadn't told anyone about my trip. I believed him because his reaction was genuine. But the question still lingers. How did someone track me to that isolated spot? How did they know which rental I booked? And most chilling of all, how long had they been watching me before all of this? What still haunts me to this day is the fact that I'm still living in the same place, still working the same job, and nothing has changed. But I can't shake the feeling that the person on that island isn't done with me.